That's amazing. So as people are coming in, I will say hello. Hopefully you are where you wanted to be. We are about to have an hour together to explore employee ownership by trust and specifically talk about the experience of Meld Studios, which is a design consultancy here in Australia, and our experience in taking this on within the Australian context. So welcome to all of you for being here. I'd like to just first remind everybody before we go in and also do an acknowledgement of country, just to let everybody know that we are recording. So if there's are things that you do not want shared into sort of the public realm, please feel free to chat with me offline or in another regard. Also, if you don't want your image, I think maybe it'll just show what I'm showing on my screen, but just in case if you want to hide yourself, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And I apologize for my terrible penmanship. For some reason, I felt like I needed to write this. We are not tax or legal advisors, although there are many of you in the room that are. And so we're sharing our experience, and some of you, especially some of the people that we worked with along on the journey who are well and truly certified to be speaking to some of these issues, they may share their experiences in this moment. But the goal is to really take a quite story kind of led approach to why we're here. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm one of many Meldsters. So I'm just the one that's presenting this story, but this is actually a collective story to be told. So thank you all for being here. And before we get into it, I would really like just to take a moment to pause and to think about where each of us are. We are in a very distributed moment, a virtually constructed one. And so thinking about what place actually means and the meaning of place, where we are, where our feet are resting, are vast and varied. And I know that we have people coming from all across Australia and perhaps even outside of Australia. So if that is the case, please welcome. Want to really recognize that we're on traditional lands, all of us, and it is unceded lands. And I think it's important to understand that context for us in terms of the conversation that we're having today. And also I think it sets a bit of a tone, I guess, in terms of, myself coming from the United States and trying to understand more about the land and where I grew up. Being here really brings that into sharp relief as well, and want to acknowledge the leaders and knowledge holders, past, present, and emerging on all the lands that we are living on and connecting on today. So thank you for that. Just a little plug. There is a wonderful group called Acknowledge This, that they have a wonderful workshop that you can go through, and they will help you create an even more eloquent, much more eloquent acknowledgement of country than I just did. But it's a great way if you're wanting that for yourself. So thank you for giving us the space to have that moment. So what I thought I would do is actually start with a bit of a story to kind of get you from where we were to where we are, throw to some of our expert advisors about to talk more specifically about EOT and what an EOT is and what that looks like in the UK, and then share with you some of the learnings that we have. What I would love to welcome you to do is in the chat, as questions come up for you, please feel free to throw them in there. I know that this probably will throw up more questions for you than answers, and that's completely fine. And some of those things we'll be able to respond to, and some of those things we'll have to go, let's get some of the experts to talk about some of the specifics. I love the mix of people that are in this virtual space today. I can see Monica, who's on the path to EOT, also in Australia, coming up fast behind us. I can see we have representation from academia, people who are researching labor and markets and employee ownership broadly. We have representation from the Employee Ownership Australia. We have representation from other design organizations who are, I'm guessing, curious about what this is and what this means. We have representation from people who are interested in designing organizations and sort of business design and structures. I know that we also have people who are here from advisory. So I guess what I'm saying and pointing at all these different angles is what a beautiful space to be in, that we're all taking these different angles and we're all here for the same purpose, which is really around the importance of employee ownership. I just wanting to acknowledge that I know that there's lots of flavors of employee ownership, and while we're focusing on one, it's not to negate the wonderfulness of the others. It's just that different ones will meet different needs. So that's just a bit of a preface. So back to us. The goal will be that we'll throw questions in there. I'll try to look as we go, but we'll try to get through this quite quickly so we can actually open it up to the floor and to conversation. So in 2009, we started Meld Studios. It was the three of us. It was Steve Beatty, Ian Barker, and myself. Those two are also on board. And it was a design consultancy. And so what that means for us is that we work with organizations to help them create better products, services, experiences for their customers, and thinking about how those organizations can work in better ways and work with the people who are going to be impacted by the decisions that are going to be made. And so our mission from the very beginning was really around improving the everyday lives of people as they interact with the world around them. And because organizations play such a huge part in that, that's why we focused on helping organizations to design with their customers and with their people who work in the organizations. I'm not making that as a plug for our company. I'm explaining it more because I think from the very beginning, we had a particular ethos to how we thought about the world, how we thought about business, and how we thought about how we were structured. So it was there in the beginning when the three of us founded Meld. And I'm very lucky to have two amazing business partners in this wild journey. So then flash forward to 2019, which feels like that was 15 years ago, but it was only 2. It's amazing how much I feel I've personally aged in the past 2 years. But interestingly, in December of 2019, so if we can all flash back to what was going on in the world in December 2019, it was actually our 10-year anniversary. Wow, we were like, look at what we've done. And at that point, we had 2 locations. I'll say now we have 4, but at that point we had 2, and we were 20 people. And Steve, Ian, and I were like, what is our succession plan? We don't have one. We don't want to leave the business, but we don't actually know what we should be doing. And so it really started a bit of a quest for us to go, well, what should that be for us? And so we started and a little bit of a quick exploration around, well, what are some of the different models and what can that be? So one is we looked at family ownership. So do our kids want to become designers and design consultants and actually lead the company? And, the fact is we had younger kids at the time, and we weren't really in a position to be like, here, take the torch. It just wasn't the right thing for us. And so we didn't know if our kids would want that, but also we were just actually passing what we felt is passing the succession torch, the succession problem onto the next generation rather than really solving it. Then we also looked at constructs around external buy. In our past, we have been approached 3 times from rather large organizations looking to take on Meld as, I guess, maybe an acquisition, sort of a mergers and acquisition kind of construct. And each time, while I could say, in my heart, probably one of them was fairly closely aligned in terms of how we think about the work and how we approach it. So culturally, wasn't such an issue. At the end of the day, it was around, we still feel like we have quite a mission to do with the work that we want to do. And we didn't want to just get consumed into a larger organization and their way of working. We felt we would lose our culture, we would lose our agency, and then actually we would lose our mission. And we had seen our friends in other countries who had gone through this path and seen that happen. And it wasn't something we were prepared for. And perhaps because we were actually looking at succession quite early, because we weren't, again, we were in our 40s, we weren't looking to retire out or anything like that. So we were still looking to be a part of the business, but we didn't want to just keep putting off the planning. We then started to look at Meldster buy-in, which was really around, we had previous conversations. And so people at Meld are called Meldsters. That's just what we are. So we were starting to look at, other people, they love Meld. They've been with Meld for a long time. They feel like Meld is part of them and is theirs already. How can we really kind of just formalize that? But what we ended up thinking was that actually we're still passing on the succession challenge to them. And we also start to create those that can buy in and those that can't buy in. So who can afford to and who cannot afford to. And that was sort of reinforcing a hierarchy that we weren't keen on reinforcing. And so what we what we thought about were sort of three key topics. So one was around longevity. So, and this has really been a core thing, what we were trying to solve for, and for us, framing what we're solving for is so important, because the way that you frame what you're solving for takes you down a particular path of solution. And so for us, it was around longevity, and that was longevity of Meld. And that was longevity of Meld outside of us as the three founders, and kind of abstracting the company and its purpose and its mission outside of ourselves. I mean, that was really the key for succession planning in our minds. The other one was to maintain independence. And so how do we continue to have the space in place to build on our reputation, to use our voice, to push the bounds of the type of work that we're doing, and to do that in a way that wasn't necessarily constrained by bigger, larger organizations or their mandates or their pressures, especially since a lot of those organizations were public organizations, and we know that that's a different kind of pressure. We also wanted to make sure that we were really building into our core structure, workplace equality, and all of the different angles of what that meant. So what we started to do was we looked to the different models, to different organizations, to see what they were doing. And we started at EOT. We had the good fortune of doing some work with EOT in the past several years and got to experience firsthand, I guess, the spirit of what it meant to be employee owned by trust, and to have them as quite a large organization and across multiple locations across the world, but also be owned in trust. And that was quite a model. So we started looking at EOT, and then we started looking at the UK. And that's where we started coming across the EOT, the employee ownership by trust. And that's when we went, let's do it. And that's when we went to our lawyers and our accountants, and they said, oh no, you can't do that here. And we said, what? So before I go on, what I'd love to do is to have Professor Andrew Pendleton give us a bit of a side story around, well, what is the EOT and what is that EOT model in Britain? And then we'll get into what did we learn around what we need to do in Australia. Andrew?
Great, thanks, Jana, and thanks for inviting me. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal land, but as you can tell, I come from the UK, and I'll just say a few words on the development of the EOT model in Britain. So the EOT, Employee Ownership Trust, was created in 2014 as the outcome of a review by Graham Nuttall, but it was actually based on a long-standing form of collective ownership by trust used by Arup, as Jana has mentioned, but perhaps most famously in the UK by a department store chain called John Lewis, which has about 80,000 or so employees, is very similar to David Jones here in terms of its market positioning, but is notable for having been 100% owned by a trust since the mid-1950s. So in 2014, the concept of the Employee Ownership Trust was born in legislation, with essentially majority ownership passing to a trust, collectively holding ownership on behalf of all employees. Now, in the UK, there is a CG capital gains tax exemption for owners selling to an EOT. Now, this is clearly important, but a lot of people think that the primary importance is that it's got employee ownership into the toolkits of professional advisors. So they'd kind of almost be negligent if they didn't mention the EOT, if they were discussing business succession with their clients. At the same time, employees can receive profit shares up to approximately $7,000 a year, tax-free. So on to the next slide. So the EOT has provided a really neat solution to business succession issues. As Jana has mentioned, it's a way of owners exiting or partially exiting whilst maintaining company independence. You don't have to sell to a trade sale or to private equity or so on. It provides a strong measure of certainty about the sale process. The owner can design the EOT institutions, and once the company has been valued, the owner can set in motion the process of transition on terms kind of determined by them, without the anxieties that can be generated by third-party involvement. One of the great joys of the EOT is that it enables a phased exit by the founder or owners. So it's not necessarily a once and for all exit. And this potential for gradual exit has been very attractive indeed. And I guess a further benefit is that it passes ownership to employees, but nevertheless maintains conventional management structure, though these can change if the company wants. But at the same time, it facilitates employee engagement and involvement. So about 50% of EOTs in the UK, for instance, have employee representatives on the company board. About 25% have an employee council, for instance. And just about all are notable for passing much more information about the business to employees than you'd find in other kind of. And it also provides a neat solution to the difficulties of transitioning to employee ownership. Jana referred to, the problems with trying to organize insider ownership. Some employees may want to do it, some may not, some may be able to afford it, some can't afford it. But by using a collective trust in this way, it resolves this problem of employee coordination and overcomes employee wealth constraints. So very finally, on the next slide, just give you an indication of the really rapid rate of growth of employee ownership in the UK in the last few years. So currently it's now about 750 employee-owned businesses, of which nearly 600 EOTs. Last year, there was just under 150 new employee-owned businesses, of which the vast majority were EOTs. And it looks like we're going to exceed that this year. We find that EOTs most widespread in companies like Meld, companies providing professional services, be it in design, architecture. There's even some legal firms that have gone down this route. But other sectors where the EOT form is becoming very widespread: construction, wholesale and retail, manufacturing, and the ICT area. And one of the really interesting things that we're finding is that as EOTs take hold in a particular sector, so the trade press for that particular sector start writing articles, and there's a kind of imitation effect going on. So that amongst architects firms, for instance, the EOT model is now really quite widely known. And this kind of imitation effect is giving a real boost to employee ownership in the UK. So I hope that's given you a little snapshot of the EOT in Britain and what the numbers are looking like. And obviously we're hoping that Australia will follow suit.
Excellent. And I think it's probably worth noting that I know that we're seeing the start of EOT coming in the US. I think Canada, Japan, I think there was some conversations, India as well. So I know that it's kind of emerging as a model in other places as well. So there's lots to learn, but clearly what does that actually mean in the context of Australia? So thank you for that, Professor Pendleton. Really appreciate that. And I'm sure there's going to be more gnarly questions that you and Andrew Clements can maybe answer as they come up. So because we could see that this was happening in the UK, and because I was naive, I said, well, surely this can happen here. Our advisors at the time were quite confident that it could not. I didn't like that answer, so I sent an email to Employee Ownership Australia, and I said, surely we can do an EOT here. People are saying we can't. And just ironically, I think just the day before, they had been having a conversation with Graham Nuttall from the UK, who was the author of the full recommendation, the Nuttall report in the UK that kind of set the foundation for EOT in the UK. He was working with Employee Ownership Australia to try to see if there was a test case for an organization that would be willing to go through a process to see if we could get the EOT to work in Australia. They had the conversation one day. Literally the next day I had emailed saying, hey, I want to do this thing. So it was sort of this, if you believe in serendipity, we had it in spades. And so we started working with them along with Andrew Clements in Melbourne. And we met every Thursday night for well over a year, still meeting, because we had to go through, well, what are the things that make this up in the UK, and what works within this context and what doesn't, and how do we make sort of a flavor that works here. And so what I want to do is, the question was, can we make it work here? And the answer is clearly yes, because we're actually here talking to you. I just want to walk through some of the biggest learnings around this, because you might still be wondering sort of, what is an employee ownership by trust and how is that different from other share plans? And so the thing I will just say probably first is around the fact that what it means is that every employee within Meld has indirect ownership of Meld, because the trust is the thing that holds the shares. And so when an employee or a Meldster comes in, they are automatically a beneficiary of those shares, an equal beneficiary of those shares. And we'll talk about that was sort of a choice in the path that we went down. And when that Meldster leaves, they do not take part of Meld with them. Meld stays held in trust for the employees, the current employees. Now I know that Arup has a model and they've set up their trust before sort of this formal EOT structure, and they have three different trusts, and they've got a charity trust, but they also have a sort of a longer standing beneficiary trust. So I know that there's probably other structures that you can set up so that maybe you are always in, if that's the case. But in our case, when you're in, you're in. And when you're out, you're in our hearts, but you're no longer getting the benefit of those shares. So a couple, sort of four main learnings for us, and I'll try to go through these quickly so we can open up to some of your more specific questions. So becoming an EOT, if you think about it in terms of three, I love this analogy of three legs of a stool. If you focus just on the technical, really sort of the legal aspect of this in terms of the setting up a trust company and setting up the board, setting up the trust deed, and all the and again, remember that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm gonna, all the paperwork and all of the different legal documents and structures that you need to get set up. If you only focus on that and you don't focus on the financial part, and you don't focus on the cultural part of what does it mean to become an EOT, and what does it mean for employees, our people to become owners. If you don't sort of look at all three legs of that stool, we all have sat on a wobbly stool before. It can get so bad that it falls over if you don't really create those strong foundations on all three sides. And so we had to really almost break down the work in our minds into sort of three structures. Thursday nights, we were having very technical, legal, tax-oriented conversations. And, I'll just preface that the goal is because we've been going through this, and we've got other organizations that are now going through this as well, ultimately we want to get to a place where this is super easy for any company within Australia to come in and to take this on. But just, I guess I would just be mindful of, we're just at the beginning of establishing this within Australia. So there's a buildup of, I guess, an ecosystem and an infrastructure that can help organizations to do this. So I think we need to be kind to ourselves of like, we're still getting there. But then the financial is, how do you fund this, and how are you actually going to fund the buyout and do that? Is that going to be through loans? Is that going to be through profit? How is that going to happen? And then the cultural is sort of that mindset and ways of being and ways of operating. And as Andrew Pendleton was just talking about, in terms of the ways of being, you don't really have to change your management structures, but it's a really great opportunity to rethink, how do we want to be operating as an organization? And actually, if we want to unlock and unleash all of our people to really seize that ownership and to take that agency that they have, it will question some of the ways in which you work. And so this is why, from a cultural perspective, this may not be the right model for everybody. I'll just kind of quickly go over it. Like, this was a model that Graham Nuttall had put forward from the UK, just to give you a bit of a sense. So this needs to be updated for, well, what would that process be in Australia? But just to give you a flavor of what the process is, you have to kind of go through a design and planning process to understand, what is the structure going to mean within your context, your construct as an organization. You've got to look through sort of how you want to be structured, tax, look at and sorry, some of this is from the UK, so it doesn't really apply here. But just to give you a sense of, like, there is a process and a flow that you need to go through in terms of those three legs. What is that going to look like for us? There are decisions that you need to be making as an organization, and then you need to actually go through the process of setting up some of these structures more formally, getting the financing going and getting that plan going, and then going through time. I'm going to skip that because I'll start to talk more about it in our context, and maybe that'll make more sense. From a cultural point of view for us, if we think about that stuff as the sort of the technical legal process and also the financial, the cultural leg, I guess, was really critical to us. We wanted a structure that would help the organization run independent of us, have collective decision making. So that was really important in terms of, I've worked in companies where people have said, I'm a part owner, just through shares, but I never felt any agency. I didn't feel engaged with, I didn't feel, and there's all sorts of reasons why, maybe they didn't do it as well as I know some other companies have done and do, but having that open engagement was really important for us. We also were using it as a way, as long as we had really high Meldster engagement, we knew that we could actually grow in ways that we wouldn't grow if we remained quite hierarchical. And even though we were flat, we felt we were very flat from the very beginning. Just the mere being of, like, the reason that we were founders, that meant something to the business. And so we kind of were looked to make decisions. And this has really helped with that flattening out. We wanted to make sure that we could further our advocacy and influence. And we also wanted to make sure that we could set up our structures in a way where we could really be managing Meld. And this is more of how we set up our management structures and how we operate. And we really focus on these 6 areas of attracting good people, keeping good people, attracting good work, delivering good work, sustainable business, and driving our advocacy. It's kind of like, if we have our eyes on these 6 things, we know that we can be a thriving organization. And actually now becoming an EOT has actually made us go, this is actually the responsibility of all of us. And those of us who are really interested in these areas can get more involved in working on the business, not just in the business. Quickly, representation is required. For us, we wanted to go all in on what representation meant. So Meld Studios is our operating company. What we ended up setting up was a Meldster forum. And so that's like an employee committee. Because we're still quite small, we're under 25. Everybody comes to those Meldster forums. We just had one this morning where we got to go through a beautiful process of exploring what is our due diligence process. So how are we going to decide who we work with and why we should work with them, or how we decide in those gray areas. And so decision making and how decisions are made have become a big thing I'll just do a little asterisk on here. I don't want you to get the impression that because we're now in EOT, we've suddenly gotten everything figured out. We are a living, breathing experiment of ways of being and ways of working. And so we're going to keep sharing our stories of how that's going for us after this as well. But we set up a trust company, and ultimately that trust company is the company with a trustee that holds those shares in benefit for Meldsters. What we ended up setting up was we have a board of directors for the trust board, where we have Meldster representation and one founder on there, and also an independent chair who happens to be Graham Nuttall, which just luckily from the process, having him as our chair was really fortunate. We then also, the Meld board had historically just been the 3 founders. We then expanded the board to have another Meldster representative and a managing director. So we went through a process of, we had Meldsters select candidates to represent them on the trust board and on the Meld board, and that's going to be a 2-year rolling cycle. That has been an amazing step for us to actually start having that. And the idea will be that over time, that Meld board will be less and less founders as the buyback goes through. I love this quote from Morgan, and I really appreciate it. I'll just share it here with you. So, becoming an employee owner has shifted my perspective from working somewhere great to feeling like I can really play a role in the company's direction. It is a new responsibility, opportunity, and privilege. And I'll say, even when we're still trying to figure out what that responsibility is, I think it's something that we still grapple with. And especially as founders, us now shifting, I will say it's been a bit, just to be transparent and open, a little bit of an identity crisis for myself, where I've been so used to being like, I'm a founder and I have to make decisions. And now we're kind of shifting into this more collective model. And it's not 80 cooks in the kitchen. That's not the thing. It's just much more distributed decision making. And so I have to, while everybody is having to shift into what does it mean for me to be an owner, I have to shift to go, well, what does it mean for Steve, Ian, and I to, still have the experience and the love of the company and still be involved, but for our identities to shift as well. Just quickly, just thinking about how profit is distributed. And so, as we mentioned, the trust holds the shares. Right now, the way that it's structured is that then the company then distributes the profit based on that share distribution. And because we distribute the shares equally across Meldsters, we've chosen to take an equal profit distribution. So that means just the model that we've chosen is that 25% of our profit on an annual basis, 25% of our profit will be distributed. So whether that's $2 or whether that's more, 25% of that profit will be distributed. And we've decided to take the model to distribute that equally. We know that other organizations do that on kind of either prorated basis, or we do have a prorated basis for people who maybe work less than full-time or things like that, or new people that have come in the year. But I guess the major thing with that is that we've decided, other companies have chosen to go, well, if you've worked with us for 3 years, then there's some formula that gives you a certain percentage of the profit, or if you've worked for longer, or if you are sort of higher up in the hierarchy of the business, you get more profit. We decided that if we had been physically giving shares to people, those shares would have equaled the same amount, because that's how it works in real life. And so that was just the choice that we made. But just know that that's a choice that you get to make for yourself as well. And then lastly is really the shift over time. How do we fund this, and how do we fund the buyback, and how do we do that shift? And so what we wanted to look at founders. We are employees. We've always been employees from the very beginning as well, but that we really decrease our board representation over time. So as the buyout continues, we start to move back. We've looked at 100% sort of technical ownership over 5 to 10 years. But the key thing for us is that we didn't want to say, hey, Meldsters, let's work really hard, and maybe in 5 or 10 years, you can get some profit from this. So we decided that we didn't want to do that, and that felt, again, antithetical to why we were doing this. So we've decided to act 100% employee owned with our profit distribution from day one. So for example, at the end of this last financial year, I guess just weeks ago, we were able to distribute profit, and we took the 25% and we distributed it out equally. Whereas in some other models, you might say, oh, well, you're not 100%, you only own 5% of the company or something like that technically. So we're going to take the 5% of that 25% and then we'll distribute that to you. That was a model that we chose for ourselves. And just to quickly illustrate that, if we look at sort of if the founder ownership is 100%, decreases over time, and the trust ownership increases over time. And so we were really at the beginning just trying to understand our future. So, and this is for all of you who are kind of in the process of doing this or are thinking about maybe something like this. Before we even began, we were starting to think about that cultural side, our future ways of working, how we want to be structured, how we want our employees to feel, how they want them to be engaged, and thinking about that stuff. And then as we started getting into getting all of the paperwork ready and getting the trust deed in place and getting the trust company in place and getting the boards set, that's where that starts to set the framework for then now the trust is actually able to take on money to buy back some of those initial shares. And so now really where we are is we're sort of at stage 2, I would say, of the process. And like we said above, it's going to be a 5 or 10 year process. We did not distribute any buyback this last financial year. We started with just profit distribution to Meldsters, and then moving forward, we'll start to use a percentage of that profit. We'll start to be funding the buyback year to year. I've been talking a lot. I'm going to open it up.
There are a lot of questions, Jana.
Oh, I'm so surprised.
Can I throw you a question? Let's begin. Yolanda asked a question earlier, and it might be one for Andrew if he's around, because it's a technical one, which is how is an EOT different to the employee share ownership schemes in the US? I think I've got those letters correct, Yolanda, the ESOPS. Yep.
The ESOPs.
ESOPs. What's the difference? And Andrew, Professor, if you can respond to that one, I do not mind.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. An ESOP in the US holds the stock in trust as part of a pension or super plan, such that when the employee retires, the shares then become distributed to the individual employees. The big difference is an EOT doesn't distribute the shares at any point whilst it remains an EOT. So EOT remains collective, whereas the ESOP, as it were, starts off as a collective entity, but then does individual distributions over time.
Yolanda, one of the things that I like about the EOT model and what we've got in place at Meld is that the benefits of the business doing well only ever go to the people who are working in the business. So that issue of where do the profits go and the tension between shareholders and employees in terms of, you know, who sees the rewards dissolves in this model. Like, we don't have that fundamental tension that you get between labor and capital, and never will, because it's only ever going to be the employees who get the benefits of it, which I kind of like. Let's continue on. Scotty asked the question, does the EOT come with its own ethics and principles like permaculture or cooperative design? Is there an ethos that comes with EOT as a thing?
Do you want me to come in on that? An EOT can sort of do whatever it wants, really. That's the great joy of it, that the company can maintain or create its own desired culture. But I just mentioned that about 70% in the UK have a very explicit social purpose.
Nick raised the question, which I think I touched on a moment ago, but one of my main concerns is for the future money flow in the economy community. Profit sharing, as now with Meld, I believe is the answer. Otherwise, workers will not have the opportunity for earning sufficient income for survival. We certainly weren't looking to address that extreme view of wealth and income inequality when we went down this path, Nick, but it's certainly something that, you know, like, that is one of the outcomes that the profits from the business flow to the employees only, and that we're not setting up this class of external people who are benefiting from the labour of the people inside the business, if that makes sense. Nicholas Gregg asked, is there some sort of probationary period for a new employee before they are signed up to the trust? Janet, do you want to answer that one?
No. So basically, you are in once you're in, and your engagement is basically prorated based on how long you were. We happened to welcome to Meldsters a couple of months before we got to the end of the financial year, both of whom received a prorated share, both of whom separate had said, I don't feel comfortable accepting this because I don't feel like I really fully contributed to it. Which I understand and appreciate. I guess this spirit of, and I guess what just tells you like this is the kind of people that we have. But we just decided to give the feel, and then the true, heartfelt feel of once you're in, we believe that you're contributing, and it just creates a different mindset.
I think, Suli, that probably answers your question as well around who qualifies as being eligible. And then the second part of your question, if an employee decides to leave afterwards, they become ineligible as soon as their tenure ends.
So basically what that would mean is if they would leave June 28th, I mean, we probably in our spirit, we probably would still distribute just because that's who we are. But
yeah,
I think that's discretionary.
Nick asks a question, since employees don't contribute any funds, if the sale price is just funded from future profit distributions, how does an EOT benefit the seller financially compared with continuing to own shares? Or in that case, are the advantages just tax advantages and the good feeling from employee ownership? Jenna, I'm happy to answer that one, but do you want to take a...
Nope, I'll go.
No?
Go for it.
Okay. Nick, the answer is like, that's exactly what's happening. As shareholders, as owners in the business, were we to make a profit as it stands, we could take the decision that those profits belong to us, and that's the end of it. What we've done instead is take the decision that we will use those profits to buy us out. And this happens in corporate share buybacks all the time. I think CBA announced last week that they were doing a $2 billion share buyback with some of the profit they made this year. It's a reasonably natural part of what goes on in businesses, that they use profit to buy shares rather than simply distributing those profits. So that's the decision that we've made, and we feel good about it. Is there a trailing income for people who have left? E.g., they continue to share in profits after they've left, sort of like a long-term incentive. This question's come from Lena. This is a model that we looked at. So we did investigate and explore what might it mean for, someone who's worked for 10 years to receive income, some kind of benefit for the next 3 or 5 years after they've left. And we ended up just settling on, no, once you leave, you leave. And that includes us. So Ian, Jana and I, when we're done with the business will be done with us, and we won't continue to benefit from it with this model in place after we've gone. Jana or Ian, do you want to touch on that any further than that?
Nope, I think keep going.
Nope.
It's a great question, but I guess I would just point out that that's a choice you can make for yourself.
Yes.
So it's not inherent to the EOT.
That was a design choice that we made. Yep.
Yeah.
There's a question, and I think I'm going to need more detail from D. Corbett. Can you spell out what Meld has done financially? What do you mean by that question? Are we able to let
Anybody can.
that person speak? No?
We'll come back to that. Maybe we'll see if the...
Okay. Apologies. I'm not quite sure what you mean.
It's in the chat as someone's asking how the buyback is structured.
Oh, how the buyback is structured.
I think we've addressed that in the use of profits. So over time, a share of the profit will go to all staff. A share of the profit will be used to buy out the shareholdings that remain, and gradually things will transfer over to the trust. I'll jump down. There's another question. Does the EOT give each employee an equal fixed interest in the trust, or is it a discretionary trust where shares can be allocated? That's a design choice, and it's one where we chose to have equal ownership and an equal share in the trust. So as people come and go, your percentage of the trust is a fixed percentage based on the number of employees. It's as simple. Let's see, at the end of the day, business-wise, what was the reaction of bankers, suppliers, and clients to being associated with an employee ownership company? Jana, I've had some conversations with clients. I know you have. What's been their response?
I think it's one of awe. I mean, obviously we're a smaller organization and a lot of our clients are quite large. And so it's hard for them to imagine, especially if they're public companies, to even imagine that. But they do look at the way that we work and the way that we seem to function. And one is as Professor Pendleton pointed out, there is a tendency to be much more transparent. And so every Meldster knows how much money we have owing. They know our cash flow. We are quite open book when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I would say that can be very overwhelming and it has been overwhelming for some of our Meldsters who maybe have been used to just being like, I come in and I do my work. I mean, obviously we're very connected anyway, but haven't really gotten exposed to the inner workings of how a business functions and the decisions that you have to make. And so I think it has been a bit overwhelming for some people to kind of go, oh, it's a lot to take in and can feel quite scary, especially if you're not used to like cash flow and you just kind of think, oh, it's so tenuous. And it's like, well, that business is tenuous like it always has been. And so I think there's been some of that. But I guess from a client perspective, I think it's definitely one of respect. I think it means something to them. But I think it's still early days to see how that plays out.
Agreed. I'm going to move on, just conscious of time, and those have been a number of financial questions. Clive has a question: what effective decision-making and decision-shaping role does the Meldster Forum have in practice? Does it have a charter? Who decides in the absence of collective unanimity on key strategic and perhaps even operational issues?
And so I think it's interesting coming off the back of just having had a forum this morning where we're literally testing out a decision-making model as it pertains to the due diligence, as I was mentioning. But we also do have a group that's working on what is our decision-making framework. I would say that in terms of, we do, as part of the process, you do set up a constitution, and in which, and especially when this gets connected to sort of the longevity of the business separated from the founders or owners, is that's where you start to kind of embed, I guess, some of your kind of almost immutable, is that the right word? Sort of values and traits, and you kind of build it into kind of, this is the core of who we are and what we value and how we want to operate in the world. So I would say, I guess we're still trying to understand the role of the forum. We're still trying to understand what's the role of the different boards, what's the role of management, and what's the role of the forum. The way that we're using the forum right now is it's a space to both raise topics that impact our Meldsters and working within the organization. It's a place for people to bring recommendations around things that they would like to see change and to have that debate and kind of discussing. And it becomes almost just a time for us to get together and shift from just announcements to conversation about those things.
Yep. I know Andrew's around, and I might throw this one to you, Andrew, if you can come online. Bronwyn's asking, were there legal changes that had to be made to legislation or regulations in order to make the model work? Or was the work more in the customized legal design of the entities of the company and trust structure? Andrew, are you able to speak to that?
Andrew Clemens?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer is absolutely the latter. This has not been based on some form of legislative restructure, and indeed that is the part that's markedly different to the UK. where there are particular prudential preconditions to get tax concessions. It was making sure that we had a structure that was effective within the existing financial and commercial arrangements for Meld.
Great, thank you. Let's
I
see.
see the one about the ATO question from Owen.
My understanding is EOTs are still on the marginal edge of the Australian Tax Office's official recognition. Did Meld get a private tax ruling on the structure to shore up the model? That one's back to you, Andrew. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is no. Sorry, a couple of observations. The first is, and I think the most important takeaway of all of this is not a tax-driven arrangement. And if people are looking for particular tax efficiencies through an EOT, to be blunt, they're looking in the wrong spot. In terms of the tax outcomes, we've played within the flags, but we've certainly been talking to the tax office, because what we want is to develop a robust infrastructure for EOTs that enables people to feel comfortable in actually moving into the structure, but again, putting it at its bluntest and crudest, not a structure that people tweak for a tax advantage. And indeed, a lot of the work that we've done has been around making sure, and working even to the point of working with the HMRC, making sure that we built into the structure the prudential protections for the revenue.
Yep. And I think, Janet, thanks, Andrew. We're right on time. I think it's probably worth just reiterating the point you just made in chat. Will any questions that have been posted that we haven't been able to get to, and there are a couple around how we've structured sort of pro-rated things and some of the other decisions that are driving, or design choices that are driving profit distribution. Jay, your question on tax, that kind of thing, we'll answer and make available in some form that we can then share. Jana.
Thank you. I will make that form accessible to you all. My apologies on that. One moment. What I was just going to say is that the EOA, Employee Ownership Australia, its role as an advocate for employee ownership broadly is a great place for all of you, if you're not involved, to start to connect in. And we're trying to build up a bit of a collection of people who are interested in EOTs around that. So we are thinking about doing a bit of an experimental, having a Slack group of people who are interested in EOTs, recognizing it's from different angles, where we can actually start to share information and start to build up a bit of a knowledge base to help other organizations who are interested in Australia to take this path on as well. And to also understand what the questions are so that we can help people in making decisions around if this is the right thing for them. So if you are interested in that, that would be an amazing thing. Just want to thank everybody for your time. I will make that link work. I will stay on and quickly make that work. I can't technically fix it while I'm talking because I've just decided I'm no good at multitasking anymore. Not that I ever was. So thank you all for your time. I will get this link up. I'll actually send it to all of you as well via email, just so that we can all stay connected, and look forward to pulling together this information. And I appreciate your openness to not having all of the answers solved, because we're just at the beginning, but I think this is a huge potential movement for Australia. And I think the more that we can make this an easier process for other organizations to do in Australia, I just think it's going to create a better outcomes for so many employees across Australia. So thank you for your interest, and look forward to answering your questions and working together.